Hello, in this video we're going to take a look at some code that a student's putting together and try and help them get it to work a little bit better. So what ultimately they want, and I've already done some changes in here, is they wanted to generate essentially a bar graph where the heights of the bars are different values. Now these heights are going to be changed based on some buttons that they'll add in a little bit later. But what they are having some problems with is that the bars, when they were rendering, they were kind of appearing on top of each other. So what they essentially had when they started this was this kind of setup. So they have an array of strings, which currently we don't use. This is going to store the names of students I suspect in their program. Some random x values, some random y values. Now, the first thing we did here was we actually removed this array altogether. The reason why we can remove this array altogether is because if I run this, if the position, the x value array is going to store the position of the top left corner of each of these bars. Because we know that the top corner of your panel is 0, 0, and this is a positive x direction and a positive y direction. So I just want to space my bars out evenly. So the actual width of the bars and the position along the x-axis can be calculated as these are rendered. The only thing we need to look at and keep track of is actually the height of these bars. So the first thing we do is we're going to remove that one. And in fact, I'm going to come down here and remove this method as well. So, and we're going to take away this, and we're going to take away that toString. Notice arrays. There's an arrays class. If you really want to quickly print out an array, you can use the built-in arrays class as a static toString method. Don't want that anymore. We'll get rid of that. We'll get rid of that. And now we're going to come into their constructor here, and we're actually going to get rid of that there. So now if all goes to plan and I run this, it should work out the same. Oh, I have an S sitting there. Let's try this again. So let's see if we can find out where we're going wrong here. So we're using these x coordinates. You have to pull out anything that's x coordinates essentially. There they are. So okay. So again, the first thing that I want to understand is that if I want these bars to kind of line up along like this, the x coordinate is going to be shifting. So it's going to be, say, the way I have it set up is 20, and then the thickness of the bar is 40, and then so this is going to be 20 plus 40, and then I put a gap between them, and then this plus 40, and then the gap between them. So we come back to our program here. Let's talk about the y values we've generated. Slightly changed how the y values generate. So because this is going to be simulating a classroom environment where a student is participating, the teacher can just click and keep track of how many times that student has participated. What we're going to do is we're going to assume that maybe there's a maximum number of participations. So the array of y values is simply going to store the number of times a student participates. It has nothing to do yet with the rendering. What we're going to do is we're going to use that number of participations, and then we're going to calculate how the scale of the y-axis we can think of it as. So if I wanted to, right now I'm going to say a class, the most that someone could participate is 30 times. This is purely some testing code here right now. Eventually what we're going to want to do is to take this array and we're going to want to put it into our graphics class, which is the class that renders and displays everything. So if I change my random to 30, see we have a wider range of participation happening. If I make this 40, we'll get even a larger kind of graph. But notice now we're kind of going off the end of the screen, so we have to do some tweaking. So for now we're going to set this to 20. So run this again, and there it goes. So let's go into our graphics, and we're going to scroll down here. So we have our fields up here. They've all been encapsulated, which is excellent. We have our constructor. So remember, our constructor name has to match the name of the class. And we're going to come down here a little bit. Here's our y coords. So these are the values that are passed in. Okay. Again, a suggestion here would be not to actually pass the y coordinates as a parameter to the constructor, I would actually declare them as a field, because you're going to modify that array when the user clicks on the buttons that you'll add to this eventually. So they have some setup here, and essentially this is where we worry about the rendering of the actual grid. So what we've done is we've constructed the panel object right here, and we've overridden the paint method for this specific JPanel object. So the nice thing about this is that anytime there's kind of a change that's tied to this panel, this method automatically gets invoked. We need this line here, super.paint, for some technical reasons, but we're not going to get into that right now. So what the student does is generates a random color. That's great. So the rendering is, this is where the rendering happens. So what we do is we generate another random color. We set the color of the drawing to this, and this is where the magic happens. So let's run this again and make sure we understand a couple things about how this is set up. So the top left corner is 0, 0, and X increases along this way and Y increases along this way. So when we draw these, we have to actually, when you use the fill rec method, it actually draws the top left hand corner of the rectangle. So some actual mathematics is required here. So the way this works is this is just referencing the top left hand corner of the rectangle. So I want to move systematically across and calculate the top left hand corner of each of these rectangles. So the way we do it is we say, okay, we're going to start off 20, and then I'm going to say the distance between this top rectangle and the x of this rectangle, the top left hand corner, is going to be 40. So the first rectangle is going to be 20 in, and then 40 times 0. The next one's going to be 20 in, 40 times 1. The next one's going to be 20 in, 40 times 3. The next one's in is going to be 20 in, 40 times 4. So what we're doing is we're using the actual loop here to help us move the x across in some systematic way. If I wanted to change this to, say, 60, notice what happens in terms of, it kind of spaces my grid out, because it's 20 in, 60 times 0. 20 in, 60 times 1. 20 in, 60 times 2. So your program can be a little more dynamic if you know the number of students in your program, if you know the thickness of the bars you want, all these different things. You can kind of change what the rendering looks like. The next coordinate gives us the y value. So let's close these up. So remember here that the y value, this is 0, 0. So we need to kind of say, okay, the y value that we're generating is from this point, is assuming this is 0, 0, is the top left-hand y value. So what we do is we get the panel height, which is going to be the distance from this top left corner to the bottom, and then we say, I'm going to subtract the y coordinate, the value in the y coordinate array, times 20. Now the question is, why do I do times 20 here? The reason why is because each interaction I'm going to represent as 20 pixels. That's kind of like my scale. So if this person has, 10 interactions, it's going to be 200. So it's going to say, I have to essentially move the cursor to that point. So it's going to go down to the bottom, and then it's going to be 20 times 10, which is going to take me to here. The next one is going to be down to the bottom, 20 times 3, let's say, which is going to take me to here. So what I'm doing is I'm setting the top left-hand y coordinate with this one. This tells me how thick the width of my bar. So what is the width, the x thickness of my bar? And this tells me my height. And again, the height of the bar is going to be driven based on y coordinates. So if I wanted to, say, have a little bit of a thicker bar here, I could make this 50. And notice I get some thicker bars here. Be aware now that what's happening is the x values aren't changing. So if I'm saying that my spaces between my x values, between the top left-hand corners, is 60 pixels, right? Then what you have to watch for is that if I take this and I extend this, say, to 60, watch what happens with my bar graph now. They touch. Right? So depending on what kind of look and feel you want, you can change that up. So I hope this video helped. Keep asking the questions. Have a good day.